I begged Becky, my wife, to not take the vaccines, but she insisted, and with every jab, she got sicker and sicker, and then she died. I didn't take any of the jabs, so I was able to take care of Becky right up to the end. All our neighbors took the jabs. Most of them got sick and died. Their vacant homes were looted and vandalized. I just finished digging a grave for Becky when I was spotted by a health enforcement drone. A short time later, a mobile vaccination unit was dispatched to our home. They started to beat down the door. I was waiting for them inside with my 12 gauge. When they burst through the door, I gave them a hot injection of double-aught buckshot. I took my guns and my bug-out bag and vanished. I lived in the ruins of buildings during the day. It was only safe to go out at night. I covered myself with a Mylar blanket from my first aid trauma kit, so I would be less visible to the surveillance drones with the infrared cameras. One night, while I was scrounging for food, I encountered another scrounger. "Are you unjabbed?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "So are we," she replied. "I see you have some firearms. How much ammo you got?" I told her I had about 400 rounds. "Good," she replied. "If you want, you can return with me to our base camp." We walked all night to a dense forest. That's how I joined the resistance of the unjabbed. Ellie and I walked through the forest wrapped in our Mylar blankets so we would be invisible to the infrared drones. Ellie told me her story as we were walking through the forest. Before she joined the resistance, Ellie was a trauma nurse in a big city hospital. She started seeing an increasing number of patients injured in car crashes and workplace mishaps. The patients were confused and disoriented, and this inability to concentrate seemed to cause the accidents. The scans revealed lesions and brain shrinkage consistent with spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Every one of the patients with this rapidly developing dementia had received the jab. There was something in the jab, possibly Lewy bodies or prion-like proteins causing the neurodegeneration. But Ellie's situation became more precarious. The hospital administrator told Ellie she had to get the jab to keep her job. Ellie said it felt like she was being pressured to sell her soul to the devil, so she quit her job at the hospital. Ellie could see the signs of the impending catastrophe in the faces of friends, family, and strangers. Ellie began to prepare for the worst. Months later, the worst happened. Millions of people succumbed to the dementia. Ellie began her long journey out of the chaos and joined the resistance of the unjabbed. Ellie and I continued walking through the dense forest, wearing our reflective mylar to hide from the infrared drones. Suddenly and silently, 2 armed sentries appeared on either side of us. They were our escort to the rebel base camp. They too wore reflective mylar. We walked another mile, sometimes doubling back to make sure we were not followed or watched by drones. We came to a clearing in the forest. The sentries walked to the edge of the clearing and stood guard as a camouflaged hatch opened. This was the entrance to a maze of tunnels leading to an underground complex of shelters, kitchens, barracks, armories, and hospitals. I climbed down the shaft, careful to avoid the booby traps that Ellie warned me about. Ellie and I reported to the base commander, Roger Dexter. Everyone called him Roger. He stood behind a desk covered in maps. Roger looked up as we entered the bunker. After Ellie introduced me, Roger began telling me his story. Before the event, that's what he called it, the event, Roger had been a white-collar worker. He managed to keep his job even though he refused the jab. Roger worked from home, only venturing out to buy food and other essential chores. But one day he was stopped by a health department cop, demanding his papers. Before Roger had a chance to find his papers, Roger was jumped by the other health department cops who strapped a medical mask on his face and forced him into a van. The van traveled a long way out into the country. Roger had no idea where they were taking him. After several hours, the van arrived at Camp Wellrest, a brand-new quarantine camp surrounded by a high fence with razor wire. Roger stayed in a comfortable bungalow in which he was required to stay inside, except for 1 hour of recreation on his front porch. But at all times he was required to wear a mask. After the final lockdown was imposed, rebellions broke out in cities across the country. Counterinsurgency measures were brutal. Cities were destroyed, infrastructure ruined, populations decimated. Roger was transferred to a makeshift facility, a shopping mall repurposed as a prison. His head was shaved, and he was told to share a filthy room packed with other prisoners. Roger was now assigned with the task of clearing rubble with his fellow prisoners of the bombed and burned cities. The work needed to be done by hand since fuel for bulldozers and trucks was in very short supply. Roger labored clearing bricks and debris from collapsed buildings. At night, he was kept awake by the screams of inmates being tortured and beaten. Rebellious and weak inmates were subjected to forced injections. None survived more than a few weeks. Roger organized a revolt of the inmates. After executing the guards and confiscating their weapons, ammunition, and other supplies, they marched across the landscape of ruined cities and towns, fighting the mechanized, heavily armed health department counterinsurgency units. Eventually, the rebels, with Roger as their leader, came to this forest. After telling me his story, Roger looked at me and asked if I was ready to join them on a raid the next day. I said, hell yeah. Three small kids, a boy and two girls, stood in the open. On one side was the health department military blockhouse, and on the other side was the forest. In the forest, the resistance of the unjabbed hid in the dense undergrowth. This being my first raid, Ellie was assigned to babysit me and show me how we were going to attack the blockhouse. I asked her about the kids. Ellie said the kids were being used as bait, that they would draw the soldiers out of the blockhouse. The health department soldiers were all pedophiles, she said. That's crazy, I said. How can you endanger those kids like that? Ellie said the kids were not in much danger. Anyways, it was the best way to ambush the depraved bastards. They're coming out now, Roger said in a loud whisper. Hold your fire until I give the order. Sure enough, the iron doors opened and the sick bastards left the safety of the blockhouse. Their eyes were fixed on the kids, not in the least aware that they were walking into an ambush. When the pedos got close, trap doors opened and the kids disappeared down tunnels faster than jackrabbits. At that point, the health department soldiers realized it was a trap, but it was too late. The last thing they saw was muzzle flashes in the dark forest and the bullets tearing them to pieces. About that time, we spotted a health department soldier up in the guard tower aiming a machine gun at us. But one of our guys had the guard tower in the sights of his shoulder-fired C-86-900 rocket launcher. We had about 20 minutes before the health department leveled the blockhouse with cruise missiles. We grabbed whatever supplies we could and walked out of the blockhouse. Seconds after the last guy
reached the safety of the forest, 2 cruise missiles slammed into the blockhouse, destroying it completely. When we got back to the base, we had visitors from the city. Unjabbed urban guerrillas, led by their resistance commander, Commandante Arturo. Arturo said he was on an important, dangerous mission. The globalist elites had finally decided to pull the plug on civilization and kill billions of people. We've been expecting that, Roger said. The jabs just aren't killing enough. How do you know this? What's the details? Who's your source? Arturo replied that the information came from a very reliable source and that he had brought the source with him to our base. Arturo introduced us to Eric. Eric was a transhuman, and the story he told made my unpolluted blood run cold.
We all listened as Eric the transhuman told us his story. Eric told us that the health department abducted him when he was a small child. They removed his blood to make adrenochrome, an anti-aging formula that they sold to wealthy elites. They surgically removed and sold his kidney. As Eric grew older, they performed horrible experiments on him, injecting him with experimental drugs and chemicals that made his hair fall out and made him weak and sick. They implanted an electronic device in his skull, devices that could receive and transmit signals, and chips that boosted Eric's intelligence. For several hours a day, they strapped Eric to a table and subjected him to intense radiation. They restricted Eric to an experimental diet that consisted mostly of bugs. When they were done experimenting on Eric, they injected him with a clot shot and left him to die in a dumpster behind the laboratory. But Eric did not die. He climbed out of the dumpster and crawled through the dark streets, where he was eventually rescued by urban commandos of the unjabbed resistance. The resistance doctors began the process of detoxifying Eric. First, they surgically removed the snake-like clots from his arteries. They gave Eric herbal infusions that reversed the effects of the clot shot. When Eric recovered, he accompanied the commandos on their raids. Eric used his sensitivity to electronics to identify health department communications and surveillance targets to be destroyed. On one of those raids, Eric began receiving a signal from a communications relay tower. Eric listened to a distant top-secret high-level meeting of the global elites, the World Domination Federation. Their leader, the high priest of the WDF, addressed the global elites about their disappointing effort to depopulate the planet. Their plan to jab billions of people with the clot shot only killed a paltry 600 million people. Poison pills, overdoses, suicides only killed millions. Again, a big disappointment for the WDF. The famines they created also came up short, killing only tens of millions of people instead of the billions needed to depopulate the Earth. And so the leadership of the global elites decided to proceed to their final solution: nuclear war. Days from now, Eric told us, a fleet of private jets will fly the global elites to the most secure bunkers in New Zealand to ride out the nuclear storm. A commando interrupted Eric with a question. What about their henchmen in the health department? The soldiers, the police, and the doctors. Eric explained that the lower ranks of the global conspirators would escape into blast-proof bunkers in mountain caves and deep underground. Commandante Arturo asked, "Is there any way we can stop them from launching the missiles?" "There's a chance," Eric said. "If I can break into the system, I can maybe stop the launch sequence, but I'll need to get into the communications center in Grand Rapids. It's 20 miles from here. We'll have to get going. We don't have time to waste."
Eric the transhuman continued telling us about the World Domination Federation's secret plan to reduce the human population that started with the jabs, which only killed hundreds of millions, and now nuclear war, which would kill billions of people. Eric told us the plan would be put into effect very soon, a matter of days in fact. First, a coded signal would be sent worldwide to the global elites and their collaborators to seek shelter in their assigned bunkers. The elites would board private jets bound for New Zealand and other destinations in the southern hemisphere, where there was the best chance of surviving the nuclear storm. Their collaborators and enforcers, the doctors, health department cops, soldiers, and mercenaries, would find refuge in underground fallout shelters located in remote regions of the northern hemisphere. When the blast doors close, the launch sequence begins. Minutes later, missiles will emerge from their silos and streak towards their targets. The initial wave of missiles will be answered by counterstrikes, igniting firestorms across the northern hemisphere. When the smoke clears, there will be nothing left but ruins. No human above ground will survive. "I can't let them do this," Eric said. "You must help me. If I can get into the communications center in Grand Rapids, if I can hack into the system, there's a chance I can disrupt the launch sequence." Commandante Arturo spoke next. "The communications center will be well guarded by the health department, police, and mercenaries. We need all the fighters we can get. Are there any volunteers?" No resistance fighters wanted to be left out of the battle to save human civilization. A strategy quickly came together. We would march on Grand Rapids as a combined force. Under the cover of darkness, Commandante Arturo would take his best commanders to attack the health department's strongholds north and west of the city. Those attacks would divert health department forces away from the communications center south of the city. Meanwhile, Roger would quietly lead a smaller unit through the ruins of the commercial strip towards the communications center. Morale was high as the resistance fighters prepared to move out. This was the last chance, the decisive battle between good and evil. We marched together through the forest. We didn't conceal ourselves from the surveillance drones. We wanted the health department to expect an undivided attack. Commandante Arturo's commandos split up into units, first striking the health department barracks west of the city with mortars and rockets. Snipers cut down soldiers as they fled from the burning barracks. Further north, another commando unit attacked the airport, where the health department operated their surveillance drone command center. Attack and counterattack, the commandos kept up the pressure on the health department. As soon as we heard the sounds of battle to the north, our small band began our southern journey through the ruins of the commercial district, the malls, the fast food restaurants, the gas stations. We made our way through the desolation and destruction. In the distance, the massive communications center loomed before us. We managed to reach the gates of the communications center undetected, and then suddenly we were intercepted by a vehicle filled with armed security guards. Staring down the barrel of a .50 caliber machine gun, Roger ordered us to surround Eric. "Protect Eric," he said. "Protect him with your lives. He's our last hope." But then, something strange happened. The security guards left without firing a shot. Then a much relieved Eric explained what just happened. "The guards just received the signal," Eric said. "They're leaving for the bunkers now." Sure enough, the communications center was abandoned. They left so quickly they didn't bother to turn any of the equipment off or lock the doors. Eric got to work right away, hacking directly into the central command center, brushing past barriers and breaking into the highest security levels at lightning speed. Just minutes after Eric broke into the system, he announced that he had interrupted the missile launch sequence. Roger asked Eric whether he could also hack into the Chinese and the Russian systems to prevent the launch of their missiles. "No need for that," Eric replied. "It's all the same system." Then Eric sent out messages by shortwave radio to the entire world explaining what had just happened. The radio operators then spread the good news that the global elites and their accomplices' plan to destroy humanity had failed. There was still work to be done. People all over the world discovered the bunkers and welded the doors shut, trapping the evil ones inside. It's only been a few years since humanity triumphed over the global elites. Those of us who survived have only begun to restore everything we lost. However, we remain armed and vigilant against a resurgence of evil. And what happened to Eric? Eric the transhuman, the man who saved billions of people from annihilation. All Eric wanted was a small farm where he could raise chickens. And that's where Eric is today.